going to go through art history a little bit to show that in our culture in the West we knew this knowledge, but it has been forgotten. So this is knowledge, but it's also an experience, as we just had with Maggie. And the experience was about this rising of Kundalini to the top of the head. And if all is good, you have felt some energy. Okay, that's fine. This is written in English. So this is based on a study I did when I studied art history. And I looked just at the 15th century in the Netherlands. But the same is true for art in Italy, in the whole of Europe, and actually in other cultures as well. So this is quite a universal knowledge. This knowledge of this Kundalini energy which sits in the sacrum bone, here the triangular bone here, it goes to the top of the head, the crown of the head. This knowledge was known in our culture. And I'll show you in the paintings of the 15th century. It's only one little phase of our art history, but we can elaborate, we can do follow-ups with showing other art of other cultures. In fact, when I studied African art, you see in the masks, the feathers and the headdress, again and again and again and again. Anything to show glory and authority and higher energy was showing these feathers and these higher things here, these beautiful, beautifying things on top of the head. So this is about the corona aurea and aureola. That is Latin. Corona means crown, and aurea means gold, and aureola means small, a small golden crown. And there are different meanings to that. So they knew the term beatitude, beatitudo, was a known term, which was the ultimate bliss and reward of humanity given by God to humanity, which was when they say like a saintly enlightened hermit, like a lady who might be in a cell, might have a smile on her face because she's in bliss, right? So you had that sort of phenomenon. But it's all based also on the knowledge given by Shri Mataji. So these two things come together beautifully. So I said corona, top of the head. We are of course bombarded with what is corona? Is it a virus? Is it a beer? Is it a flower? Because the crown of a flower is also called corona. So you have various meanings to the word corona. Then around the sun or around a star you have an aura. Then around the sun or around a star you have an aura of plasma, that is explosive matter that is burning, that extends millions of kilometers into space. But the crown or the corona also comes from ancient Greek, and it means wreath or wreath, laurierkrans in Dutch, okay, krans. And that was to symbolize victory. So the emperors gave themselves a corona of laurels around their heads, Julius Caesar or Napoleon, who crowned himself as emperor. Actually, that's quite a funny thing. And so he gave himself the sign of worldly glory. And it comes from an old myth of Greek mythology where the god Apollo, who was the sun god, he chased Daphne, but when he touched her, she turned into a laurel tree. So in a way it's also a symbol of virginity. She didn't want this, as she prayed to her father, who was a river god, and he turned her into a laurel tree. And that's why his love for her is symbolized as laurels. And that's why the word laureate or laureate is someone who achieved something in his studies. Baccalaureate or of a laureate from a competition. Is someone who achieved something, a certain glory and a certain victory. Now this victory is very important. Here you see a statue of victory. This is in London. It's a bronze statue made by Adrian Jones. it shows Nike is the goddess of victory, and she sits on a chariot with 4 horses, but she brings a laurel wreath or a crown, a corona. And so it's a symbol of victory, and this is important. The term victory is important also for us in the yoga, believe it or not. So now in the yoga we also speak about the crown of the head. And Shri Mataji here, the lady who founded this yoga, as Maggie also explained today, stressed that the ultimate chakra is the 7th chakra here. And this is where our own individuality, our own energy, connects with the divine energy. And that is why it's so important here. And this is where the baby is soft here, at the top of the head. And the life energy comes here in the head, in the crown chakra. Now I'll explain a little bit more about that crown chakra. It's called Sahasrara in Sanskrit, and that means 1,000-petaled. It means all the nerves come together here, and all the chakras, all the energy centers in our body that you see there in that image, they are integrated in this Sahasrara, or 1,000 petals. 1,000 nerves are all together here, bundled. But this is also the place, according to the Indian tradition, where the Atma, which is our soul, because this is the last thing that lives. If we live, if this still lives. But if the heart stops beating, we don't live anymore. So it's the energy of life. By the Kundalini, it is risen up. So the Atma is connected to Paramatma. And that is the all-pervading energy, the life energy that is everywhere, that makes the plants grow and the seeds grow. And so this communication takes place here in the crown chakra. And when you are connected, this is open. It is also victory, and I'll come back to that because in the medieval paintings this is very clear. But yoga means, the real meaning is related to other languages, and it always means connection. So you see yoke of juk in Dutch. Juk connects 2 cows. I don't know, from which country are you?
I used to live in Australia.
And what is your language?
Spanish.
Spanish. What do you call a yoke between 2 cows in Spanish? Yugo? Yugo. Jugo means yoke. Yeah, so the same word is in all the languages. Yeah. And in Sanskrit it's yoga, and it means connection. Or in Latin it's conjunctio. And this is an important word. Remember this, because it will come back in the text from the Middle Ages in our own culture. So it's connection between what? Our hypothesis here is it's between the anima and Deum, the Atma and the divine, God. And literally these words that are in our ancient Sanskrit tradition of India are used here in the West in our scriptures, religious scriptures. Conjunctio animae ad Deum, the conjunction of the soul with the divine, takes place at the Sahasrara, at the crown chakra. Now we're going to look at some art. Okay, so here you see, this is a famous painting in Belgium. There's now an exhibition of this artist, Van Eyck. And he painted, it's not very clear, is it? But you see it clearer there, the Madonna. And there's God the Father, or Christ, and then John the Baptist. And they all have a golden arch around their heads. They have rays of light. You don't see it very well here, but it's around the Madonna. And a crown. Madonna has a crown. Now look at the crown. There are 3 layers. There's jewels, flowers, and stars. I'll explain it in a minute. So here, if you look at the Madonna, you see 7 elements, or 7 signs, or symbols, that symbolize her divinity. If you look at the Madonna, you see 7 elements, or 7 signs, or symbols, that symbolize her divinity. So first of all, the semicircular arch around her head. Now, do you remember what we did a minute ago with Maggie here? This. So it's a protection around our chakras and around our head. So in effect, there are 7 lines here. I don't know, that's maybe a coincidence, but there are frames of gold. But what is important, in that gold is a Latin text that praises the Virgin as being higher than natural light. I'll show you in a minute. So what we feel here, these vibrations, there we show it like a lotus flower. You can see it as light sometimes in the Indian paintings, Buddha. So they represent it with light, but in fact we don't see the light coming out of our hands, or we don't see the light around someone. Maybe you can, but it's not really an objective, observable phenomenon. It's the light is mainly a symbol or a sign that we use to express this divine light or this divine energy, which is beyond light. It is not really natural light. So she is beyond light is written in the text here. I will show you in a minute. Then you have golden rays around her, and in the whole painting no real gold is used except in these rays and in this arch. Only for the divine symbols it is used. And then you see a triple crown, which the arrows show. Here is a layer of jewels, blue and ruby, red and pearls. Here is a layer of flowers, roses and lilies, and here there are stars. And these 3 are also important in the paintings in the 15th century, and it all has a meaning. If we go into further lectures, we can talk for 40 years about this. So here you see first of all the 7 arches. I made some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I put some numbers. But in a way, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe I go too far here, but there is a correlation, if you want, between the 7 bandhans we do around ourselves and the fact that you have these arches. But it comes back in other paintings, I'll show you a bit later. Now here we go a bit into the text analysis. So it's quite complicated because you can't read it very well. The Latin text on the back, the Latin text here, it says, Haec est speciosor sole super omnem stellarum dispositionem, etc. I'll give you the translation in a minute. So this is the Latin text. Luci comparata invenitur prior, candor est enim lucis aeternae, speculum sine macula, Dei majestatis. What is written around her is a quote from the Bible, from the Book of Wisdom, the Old Testament. And the Book of Wisdom talks about wisdom, but it describes wisdom as a lady. And this is the text that is written there. And it says that this lady, wisdom, is more splendid than the sun. She's elevated above the order of the stars. So she's more splendid than the sun. So she's not natural light. She's a higher light. Compared to light, she's found first, since she is the clarity of eternal light, the mirror without blemish of God's majesty. So they also said there in the Old Testament that she is like a mirror that has no stains on it, no spots, without blemish, that therefore purely reflects God's majesty. And in the Middle Ages, they took that old text and said, oh, that is Mary. That is the Virgin Mary. So that is why they put that text around her head and around this holy area of the Sahasrara. Okay? So it's an Old Testament text, Book of Wisdom, Psalm 5, verse 12. You can look it up in the Bible if you want, it's there. So she's identified as the wisdom. So here you have again the text. I'm not going to reread it, but It's the same as here. And so I summarize now. We've seen that there are golden semicircular frames around her. There's a Latin text that praises her as higher than natural light. And then there are golden rays around her head. You see here, I've colored them, but you see them here. And they're painted in pure gold, and this pure gold reflects the light. And in the Middle Ages there are a lot of texts by Abbe Suger and by others that prescribe the usage of gold in religious paintings, because it's the matter that is the closest to the divine, because it reflects light which is immaterial. But they have a problem because they can't represent what you cannot see. So you have to still use the light as a representation of the divine. And then you have the triple crown with the 3 layers, and I'll show you now. We'll go into that now. And then you have the triple crown with the 3 layers, and I'll show you now. We'll go into that now. So you see these 3, the stars, the flowers, and the gems or jewels. But what is the meaning of that? Now there are texts in the Middle Ages that talk about that. First of all, this old saint, he summarized Albertus Magnus. Don't know if he was a realized soul, which is connection, but he summarized the old traditions. And he said there are 2 types of corona or beatitudo. There is the substantialis, which is substantial beatitudo or aurea, and there's the accidentalis, which is accidental, means for special saints. Here it's written, Haesunt duae coronae in beatitudine, una substantialis quae dicitur aurea, area accidentalis quae dicitur aureola. And it means, in beatitude there are 2 coronae, one is substantial and one is accidental, or is the aureola. Okay, now here you see this. Here in the painting, what is red is the accidentalis, is the special crown for very special saints. And the general blessing is the aurea, the first one in blue, which is the arch and the rays. This is what we all can feel easily when we do our bandhan and we raise our Kundalini and we feel this cool breeze. That is what all the saints, yes, that's what saints are. They can feel these vibrations, so we can feel that. We can become saintly. But some very special saints can have 3 more blessings. So another important writer, a philosopher, was Thomas Aquinas. And he explained, and this is quite an amazing text, that the corona aurea, the golden crown, is a metaphor that represents the bliss, the beatitudo, that is the gift of God to humanity, and it is the highest gift humanity can get. And it is symbolized as a crown, so it's on top of the head. So he is describing what yoga is, basically. The essential reward of man, which is his beatitude. And what you just experienced, in fact, it might just be like you're a little bit without thinking and you feel cool breeze. But if you develop it further, you can experience that it is a complete liberation of all problems you might have. So you can have this beatitude. You can totally transform yourself. You become your own master, your own doctor, your own guru. And so the beatitude consists of the perfect conjunction, or yoga. You remember the conjunction, yoga, juga, of the soul or the atma with God. And that highest reward is metaphorically called the corona or the aurea. Corona, aurea in Latin, they sometimes only say one part of the word instead of both the adjective and the noun. They say aurea or corona. So anyway, they knew that yoga or conjunction is the connection of the soul with God, and it takes place at the top of the head, and it is the beatitude, it is the bliss. In the previous slide we saw that Thomas Aquinas described the essential reward of man, which is his beatitude, consists in the perfect conjunction of the animae ad Deum, the soul or the spirit with God, and that is the highest reward from the divine for humanity, and that we saw with Albertus Magnus. And metaphorically, it's called the corona or the aurea. In this slide, we indeed see in the same color codes, in blue the word connection or conjunctio, and that means yoga and connection with Paramatma in blue color. And connection of what? Of the Atma or spirit in the heart. That takes place at the Sahasrara or the crown of the head. So you see a perfect correlation between the medieval, early scholastic description of the beatitude and the yoga, the knowledge that exists already for millennia in India and it is now known by us, of the yoga and the connection of the soul with the divine. The same beatitude or bliss that we experience in the yoga at the top of the head was described in the Middle Ages, the 13th century, but it was actually an extension of a long tradition throughout the early Middle Ages by Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus. And they described that beatitude as the corona aurea, which they called a metaphor for the bliss at the top of the head. Corona obviously is located on the top of the head, and not only this general reward of saints was given, but the aureola was added to that for special saints, a special reward called the aureola super auream. And this enhanced the general reward, but it was only given to 3 types of saints: the virgins, the martyrs, and the doctors. And the 3 categories received that special reward because they were victorious over 3 obstacles that stood in the way of that connection, that conjunctio ad Deum, the connection with the divine. These 3 enemies were against that, and they were the flesh, the world, and the devil. But thanks to their victory over these 3 obstacles, they received a very special bliss added to the general beatitude. There were various theologians in the Middle Ages who stated that the Virgin Mary was all 3 types of saints in one: a virgin, a martyr, and a doctor. I give 2 examples here. There's Richard of Saint Laurent, who lived in the 13th century, and Gabriel Biel, who lived in the 15th century. Richard of Saint Laurent wrote praises of the Virgin Mary, or Mariale, and he claimed Maria est martyr. She is a martyr. We'll see in the next slide what he means by that and why people thought that Mary was a martyr. Gabriel Biel, in the 15th century, an important nominalist, said, and I'll translate what he wrote in Latin, which you can read on the slide. He wrote, "Why would we not say that the Virgin Mary, after all, the most honorable of all beings, who completely exterminated all flesh, world, and devil by the grace of God, that also she carries an aureola?" Mary was considered a virgin, of course. She was considered a martyr because she suffered so much, because the highest being in the world, as she knew, it was a divine person. She knew it before anyone else, because she knew how they were chased away from Bethlehem to Egypt. She knew how Herod wanted to kill all the children because he knew there was a divine being incarnated. Mary knew that he ran away and went to talk to the Pharisees in the temple. Louder? Okay. So Mary knew a lot about the divinity of Christ, but she also saw him being killed by the Romans. And that was the biggest martyrdom you can imagine. If a mother sees her child being killed like that, can you imagine? That's horrifying. That's worse than being killed yourself. And so therefore she gets, okay. So these three symbols are for virgins the flowers, for doctors the stars, and for martyrs gems. So it's a bit complicated, and I don't have enough text here to prove it, but the virgins were blessed with flowers, the fragrance of virgin. The lily flower is a symbol of virginity. You see that in paintings. The gems, the color red of the stones of the gems refers to the martyrdom, the blood. And the stars refers to the light, because the doctors who are teaching others, who are converting them to the truth, are giving the light to these other people. So therefore she has three special crowns. So I already explained this, that this term victory that the crown is also symbolizing, that winning over something, is also related to the yoga, because the three elements of the crowns were the virgins, the doctors, and the martyrs, and they are winning, they have overcome the enemies of the soul, three enemies. And in the Middle Ages that was the flesh, the devil, and the world. The world is all the institutions and the power people who are stopping you to go beyond those human-made rules. Okay? So, like what Christ did, he challenged the Pharisees and their laws that were man-made. And therefore they can't cope with it, and they want to kill these people, these challengers. So, and they're called the martyrs. And then the doctors are the ones who are so learned that they're so learned that they can overcome the temptations of what they call in the Middle Ages the devil, which is the cunning arguments why you should not be okay as a person. And then in the Middle Ages especially they emphasized the flesh and the temptations of that. And some very unique saints received all three the corona aureolas. So therefore they get a triple crown or three crowns. In this print that we see here, published by Aldo Maruzio in Venice in the 15th century, we see that the three crowns are held by two angels above the head of the Saint Catherine. And indeed there are only very rare people who received the three corona aureolas, because they were the saints who were victorious over all the three enemies of the soul, the flesh, the world, and the devil. And therefore they were in one person, they were virgin, martyr, and doctor. And there are only a few examples. Christ is, of course, virgin, martyr, and doctor, all in one. He was teaching the believers, he sacrificed himself, therefore was a martyr, and he was a virgin, obviously. And we've already demonstrated that the Virgin Mary was considered as the same, virgin, martyr, and doctor, teacher of the church. And there's another example that is here, Catherine of Siena, the saint Catherine. And there's an element in this picture that demonstrates that indeed the three crowns are a symbol of virginity, martyrdom, and teacher, being a teacher. And that is the lily, the crucifix, and the palm tree, indicated here with the blue arrows, coming out of the book that she's holding in her right hand. Lilies are symbols of virginity. Crucifix stands for the faith and the life of Christ that doctors or teachers are teaching about. And the palm leaf comes from the Old Testament, the book of Revelation. So indeed, some pictures show three crowns that are the triple corona aureola, which is the special saint's bliss, added to the general bliss of all the saints, the Beatitudo. Here I briefly add another slide to illustrate how the white lilies were symbols of virginity, mostly in scenes of the Annunciation, where the angel Gabriel visits the Virgin Mary to announce her carrying of Christ the child. And this moment also shows how the Holy Spirit is shining upon the head of the Virgin Mary. In the arch porch we see the vase with lilies, and this is by Petrus Christus, a leading painter after Jan van Eyck in the 15th century. The virgins were blessed with flowers, the fragrance of virgin. The lily flower is a symbol of virginity. You see that in paintings. The gems, the color red of the stones of the gems refers to the martyrdom, the blood. And the stars refers to the light, because the doctors who are teaching others, who are converting them to the truth, are giving the light to these other people. So therefore she has 3 special crowns. So Mary, or the Virgin, overcame all 3. So therefore, now you understand a little bit better why she's so important in the Middle Ages and why she represents this yoga or union. And you see also the 3 crowns in the other figures, the other divine figures in the same painting. These 3 crowns are here again. And there's not many figures, there are some saints of all these 3 qualities. Now we go in representing the corona, aurea and aureola. We can do it in 2 ways. One is mimetic or non-mimetic. Sorry, this is quite scientific. Mimesis or mimetic means copying, like mime. You know mime artists? They are copying. So copying is mime. So in painting you can copy things, or you can be non-mimetic. It means you don't copy things, but you represent abstract ideas. And the golden discs around saints, you don't see that in reality. So that's a non-mimetic sign. But if you paint light, as if it's the sun shining, that's mimetic. You copy light. So you can represent it in 2 different ways. So here Memling, Hans Memling, another painter, he represents the Madonna, and he represents rays around her head, as you see. Now these rays you don't see like that, these lines, you don't see them. So that's a non-mimetic representation. So he shows something, although they're in the 15th century, they're already very capable of painting 3-dimensional objects, a beautiful round apple. And it's because in the 15th century science started, mathematics started, in the markets, trading, selling. You had mountains of apples and oranges and things, so they had to measure and get money for volume, so then you had to know about what volume was, or to count. So all this 3-dimensionality was important. So therefore, they forgot about what you can't see, which is the spirit, the spiritual things. But at that time it was still in between the 2 periods, between the Middle Age period and the scientific period, the modern age. So they painted rays in the 3-dimensional space. But also sometimes they said, no, you can't see it, but we still know there's something divine. So we're going to hide the symbols in the reality. So here you see that by chance, behind Maria, you see a golden damask cloth on which there's a flower pattern, and it's by chance just around her head, and by chance there's a little bit of gold coming out here. And so it's like to say to the believers at the time, there is something divine. We can't see it. We know that. We're now modern people. We paint the reality as we see it. But we remember how there were golden arches. And you see here the baldachin around her head and the plants around her. So that's hidden symbolism. They start hiding it. And then a bit in other more evolved people, they even hide it even more, and they say, oh, there's nothing, no divine construction of plants around her. And she just sits in the living room with an open fire, and there is a screen in front of the fire that stops the heat and the fire jumping into the room. But by chance, there is a flame above her head, there's some light, and there is a vandan or arch around her. So they still had they were conflicted. They thought, we can't represent these golden discs anymore and these rays, but we still want to show that truth. But we, for a long time, didn't know that. We needed art historical researchers to find out, and all this has been found to be actually the symbolism that lived then. As these texts have seen, corona aurea, aureola, the bliss, etc., they wanted to show that Mary being a very special person. In the modern age, the halo totally got lost, and the artists started even to joke about it. And this is a surreal painter, Max Ernst. And you could wonder, these halos You don't see that in reality, so they joke that it falls off the head of Christ. So, sorry, this is just a little joke. To go back to the Middle Ages, another interesting thing is that the pure gold was used in those rays, and only in those rays, not in anything else. There are a lot of other golden objects, like this jewelry and the crown here. There's no real gold used in it, only in the rays, and only here around the dove of the Holy Spirit. And the interesting thing is that one ray here that comes from the window falls exactly in the center of the head of the Madonna here. So that's a very important point. And also interesting is there are texts that show that the window there and the divine light that comes through the window is also a symbol of the divine annunciation and Immaculate Conception, because the light comes through and they make it come through a window and the glass doesn't break of the window. So it's pure non-material energy that goes through the window, so the virginity remains intact. So, and then another thing is at the feet of this God the Father figure, there is a crown, also a big crown with jewels and flower patterns. So again, the same symbolism is here, but what it is, it's meant for humanity, because the crowns here are carried by divine people, but they are saying in this painting, and there's a big landscape with all these saints here. I don't have the picture here, but above that, just under the crown, there's this dove of the Holy Spirit, and that's that dove. And again, you see that there's a combination of mimetic and non-mimetic. There's like a halo of light, as if it's the sun, but it's not the sun. There's the Holy Spirit in there, and there are real golden rays here that come into the landscape. Then the gold is used to reflect the light. Here we see a bit of a detail of the dove of the Holy Spirit in the Van Eyck altarpiece, where you indeed see that the dove is surrounded by a halo of light, as if it was in the sun, and it radiates rays that are gold, actually, covered in gold leaf. So it's a combination of mimetic, which is the light, as if it was the sun, and non-mimetic, the rays that you can't observe as such in nature, definitely not in gold leaf. But the rays go into the landscape, go towards the saints that are standing there, in this case the virgins. And you see the same here in this Master of the Langatok Hours. Hours are books with text in there. And, what do you call this?
Illustrated manuscripts.
Yes, illustrated manuscripts. And you see the same symbolism here, the Annunciation, the rays of gold coming through the window is not broken, and the Holy Spirit right above the head of the Madonna, and the ray of light right on top of her head here again. So it's just to illustrate that they knew that it was the top of the head where the blessings of the divine took place. And then later they continued in later art, this is in the 16th century already, with Gerard David. And you again see a Madonna with angels, but now it's the angels that are forming the halo, if you want, because they don't represent the lines of the golden rays. But you still see you could say it's a mimetic crown, that it's copying a real crown in reality. But it is not a regaled crown. This is the Corona Aurea, which is the highest blessing that special saints have. And here again, just to show you that these arches, you see them a lot, that they use the alcove or the nis or the frame as a way to make it justify that there's a halo around the Madonna, when they can already paint in a normal three-dimensional way. And the gold used reflects the light from heaven. So that was that. And now we go back to our yoga, where that reality can be experienced in our daily life now. We can be like those saints that were represented. in the Middle Ages. We can have the Beatitudo. Towards the end of the 15th century, we see an evolution in the representation of the Corona Aurea. We see here in this painting by the master of the Saint Ursula legend that the Madonna is surrounded by a golden frame, obviously, which is the actual frame of the painting, which is obviously three-dimensional and covered in gold leaf. But there is not only the gold leaf that reflects the divine light. On the frame, there is also the gold leaf, obviously used in the rays around the head of the Madonna. But importantly, now in a mimetic manner, that means copying reality, in the flat background behind the Madonna, we see an extension of the three-dimensional frame in an illusionary representation of that frame or continuation of that frame in the background. So it looks as if the three-dimensionality of the frame continues in the flat background, which is covered in gold, obviously. So it is an extension of the three-dimensional aurea, Corona Aurea, into the two dimensions. So this enhances the holy area around the Madonna in which she is situated, the heavenly realm. At the end of the 14th century, for example in this altarpiece of Melchior Bruderlam, which shows 4 phases around the birth of Jesus, we see a combination of mimetic and non-mimetic. What is non-mimetic is the holy symbols, the disc halos, the rays of the divine that come out of the mouth of God, that fall through the Gothic window on the very top of the head of the Virgin Mary, which is the Immaculate Conception, symbolized or reinforced as a concept by the window that is not broken, and the lily in the vase, which is a symbol of her virginity. So those holy symbols of the halo, the divine rays, but also the golden sky and the frame are referring to the fact that this is a heavenly event. But it is combined with already a very skillful rendering of 3D figures and garments, as well as the angels around the figure of God, and the rock formations, as well as the buildings. So it is a transition from non-mimetic to mimetic, but the holy symbols are still very non-mimetic. And now we have a painting that we'll spend a bit more time with. It is by Jan van Eyck, who painted the Ghent altarpiece in 1432, and a few years later he made this small painting, which is only 31 centimeters high, 14 wide. It's in the Gemäldegalerie Berlin, and it shows the Madonna with her child in a Gothic church building. Now, it's all realistic, you could say. It almost is painted like a photograph, a representation of a lady with a crown in a church. But there are a few remarkable things we can observe here and analyze that say the opposite. It's not at all just a realistic representation. It is all hidden symbolism. It's full of symbolism, and it is the symbolism of the Corona Aurea and Aureola, the bliss enjoyed by the Virgin Mary as it is enjoyed by all the saints, and the special reward on the top of her head, which is the Corona Aureola. Why can we conclude that? Well, Edwin Panofsky, the famous art historian, argued in 1953 in his book called Early Netherlandish Painting that churches were always oriented towards the east with their choir, with their apsis and sacristy. And therefore, in this painting of this Gothic church, the windows on the left are in the north side of the building. The light that falls through these windows is dappled on the ground, and on the left side of the Madonna you see these 2 light patches, and it also comes in through the doorway on the left and reflects on the wall behind the head of the Madonna. This light comes all from the north of the building, and it comes through the Gothic windows and falls on the top of the head of the Madonna. Now, this we have seen in the Bruderlam altarpiece and in the illuminated manuscripts, and it's the same symbolism. But could it be that it's normal sunlight? No, the sun never shines in the north. physically. It can't be. Can't be there. The sun is never in the north. So what the painter and his patrons wanted to represent here is that this light that comes through this Gothic window on the top of the Madonna's head and then on the floor is divine light. It is not the physically perceived light of the sun, but it's another light from another order. It is divine light coming from God the Father and reaching the top of the head of the Madonna. So that's a hidden symbol for the same rays of light that used to be represented in gold, and now it is just appearing as if it's sunlight. So it's a hidden symbolism. Then we have the crown on the top of the head of the Madonna. It is the crown of the corona aureola, because we see the same triple symbolism that we saw in the Ghent altarpiece. We see the red gems, we see the floral patterns, the curls in gold, and we see the stars at the top, which are represented in a cross shape that shines. So we saw the martyrs, the virgins, and the doctors or teachers have these three attributes: gems, flowers, and stars. And the same is here in the crown of the Madonna. So it is the triple corona aureola, which is the special reward of Mary on top of her general blessing of divine light that surrounds her being. And finally, we have a look at the Ghent altarpiece again, that shows the Virgin Mary with both the corona aurea and aureola. And this image summarizes very well what we've discussed today, because it considers many of the symbols and metaphors we looked at today. First of all, the corona aurea, or the general blessing of all saints, given by God as a reward, and which is beatitude or blessings, is represented by the golden arches, first of all, a Latin text, and the golden rays around the Madonna. The golden arches are covered with gold leaf, and this is a material that reflects light. And in the Middle Ages, light was considered as the substance closest to the divine, and therefore gold or gold leaf was the material recommended to represent holiness and divinity and bring that into the paintings, especially in the halos and corona aureas of saints or saintly persons like the Virgin. Secondly, in these golden arches there is a text, a Latin text from the Old Testament, the Book of Wisdom, and that text describes wisdom as higher than natural light, above the order of the stars, and a mirror that is immaculate, that reflects God's majesty. And these qualities were considered in the Middle Ages, that means millennia later, as a description of the Virgin Mary. It was ideal to describe the Virgin. She was also considered as an incarnation of that wisdom that was described in the Old Testament. So therefore, these words are very appropriate to be placed in the halo surrounding the Virgin Mary. Thirdly, the golden rays around her head also are covered in gold leaf and reflect that divine light. And these three elements are the corona aurea, the general blessing. But the special blessing given by God to very special saints, namely to virgins, martyrs, and doctors or teachers, is represented here with the triple crown or the triple corona aureola. The Virgin Mary was so perfect that she was embodying or contained the three qualities of martyrdom. She was considered as a doctor, and she was a virgin, obviously. Doctor because she was teaching the first apostles about the youth and the divinity of Christ as a child. And so, all in all, she had the three qualities and enjoyed the triple corona aureola, the very special blessing, on top of her normal general blessing of beatitude. And now we bring the art back to the yoga. This is the point of the whole presentation. We saw this image of this chakra chart before, where the Kundalini is in ochre color, rises through the central spinal cord and reaches the top of the head, or the Sahasrara, where the Atma, which is the heart, the flame or the spirit in the heart, is brought in contact with the Paramatma, which is the all-pervading spirit of consciousness, of divine consciousness. And this connection, or yoga, is in fact the union of the Atma via the Kundalini with the Paramatma. And that is exactly the same as what is described in the Middle Ages and represented by the golden halos and the crowns, and it is the conjunctio animae Deum. So this takes place at the 7th chakra, on top of the head. You feel a cool breeze when that happens. You feel joy and you feel divine bliss. And in the paintings, that is called the corona aurea and aureola, the highest reward of man, which is the beatitude, the beatitudo. And that indeed in yoga is also considered as the joy of the spirit. And you feel indeed a cool breeze when that happens. So this is to come to an end. And the next slide will show you the 7th chakra in another way. Then in this slide, we look at the Sahasrara, or the 7th chakra, on the top of the head of Shri Mataji Nirmala Devi, who founded Sahaja Yoga. And the whole point of the yoga practice is the opening of this chakra, which Shri Mataji achieved on the 5th of May 1970. It was very necessary, she found, to open this chakra for humanity, because it allowed finally, after a long quest of millennia, the seeker to reach the divine and to be connected and to establish divinity within ourselves. And it's remarkable that in the Middle Ages this knowledge was known, that the beatitude, or the bliss given by God as a reward to man, the ultimate bliss, the highest reward, was known to be located at the top of the head, as it was called the corona, aurea and aureola, which means the golden crown, being located on the top of the head. And that is exactly the same as the ultimate goal of the yoga, with the end result of feeling bliss, beatitude, and total satisfaction inside. And to finish, here's a slide that gives a couple of links that show how Shri Mataji is teaching the public how to protect ourselves with 7 arches around our being. And I recommend we all look at this and practice this ourselves. And then the last link, the second link, is Shri Mataji showing how to raise the Kundalini, which allows the yoga to take place, the conjunctio animae Deum. And she shows how to raise this divine power and tying a knot at the top of the head symbolically on the crown of the head, creating as it were the experience of a crown on top of our heads, which is an expression of the wish to keep that blessing in our awareness all the time. And this allows us to transform ourselves, to transform how we interact with the world, and ultimately to transform the entire world.